All right, everybody. Hello, good evening. This is Take Note at a little different time. Um, we're usually coming to you on Sundays at 2 p.m. Pacific, but today we're having a sort of happy hour, even though it's not Friday, with my very good friend Michael Noble, who is in New York. My name is Jennifer West. I am the artistic director of Muse West Concerts, and I am the host of your podcast, Take Note. I am very grateful to be on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish nations of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples who have been forming friendships for generations based on music and sharing of knowledge. So, Michael, welcome to our podcast. You have a concert this Saturday.
Yeah, thank you
Very,
for having me.
very exciting. Very, very much looking forward
Yeah,
to
me
it.
too. hmm
So, you were recording this concert for us in New York. Um, Tell us, how do you put yourself in quote unquote performance mode when it's for camera and microphone? And how is that a different feeling or situation than having people in a venue with you?
I think it's quite different. Firstly, you don't. I think I thrive a lot. I think most performers would say they thrive a lot off of the audience being there, that energy that you have. There's also a kind of, I guess, it's almost like improvisation in this sense because you don't know what's going to happen. There's different things can happen within that kind of atmosphere. I think recording in a studio is for most musicians more difficult because there's also that idea that, well, A, there's no one there. You're not really performing for anyone. And B, there's that idea that you're going to hear yourself back and that you kind of strive for perfection. And I think it's a much more intense mental state to be in, a much more, you feel much more like you need to be perfect. So.
It's terrifying to hear yourself recorded and then listen to it back. I've experienced that, and it was not an easy experience. Did you find that as well? That even, you've been doing this for a long time, does it ever get easier to listen to yourself after a session? Or do you still go, oh, that's what that sounded like? Interesting. Is it still kind of a learning experience each time?
I think there's, obviously the first time you do that, well, when I first did it, I was quite young. So maybe like seriously the first time in high school or for some competitions back then. But that was, I think, shocking in a sense. Now it's like, yeah, I think it still surprises you in many ways. I think, and it's not the most fun thing to do at the beginning. But
No.
I think I've gotten used to it in a sense. So you kind of understand that, if you've really prepared correctly, and obviously I've also recorded myself before these performances, like even on like a Zoom or even on my phone, for instance. So you kind of
Mhm.
have an idea of what things will sound like. So I think that helps.
And I think that this is we try to bring our podcast back to education in a roundabout way, but I think that this is something that is such a useful tool for our students as well,
hmm
is get this out, listen to yourself, and see how it goes.
Exactly. For nothing else, I mean, for balance, for pacing, there are certain things you can hear, I think.
Definitely.
And the quality of recordings on these is so much different than when I first started recording when I was 13 or 14. So, yeah,
Back in the day when BlackBerry ruled the market.
exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have chosen such a wonderful range of repertoire that um, spans hundreds of years, starting with Mozart, who composed Sonata in A minor, K310. I believe, was it 1778?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So where was he at the time when he composed that sonata?
Um, I think he was traveling. To be honest, I don't remember exactly where he was, but I know that his mother had just passed away, and
Mhm.
so that's really the impetus for, I don't know, for I think the emotive quality of that, emotive content of that piece, especially.
Mhm.
Um, the sort of angst and the trials and tribulations. The immense sadness he felt. He was very close to his mother, so I think that was emotionally where he was. Which,
I
yeah,
seem to recall the travel bit too between Paris and
yeah, I think
Salzburg.
it was Paris. Yeah,
Mhm.
so yeah, so I think that was where he was at emotionally. It was a very difficult time, and it's one of the most intense, if not, in my opinion, like maybe the most intense beginning of any of his sonatas and any of his pieces. I mean, it's a very intense dissonance at the beginning with this grace note, and just, yeah,
Mhm.
the emotive content of it is, yeah, very kind of disconcerting at the beginning, and it thrusts you right into this kind of um, just kind of heart-wrenching uh, beginning. So I think you're really like you're propelled forward. So I think you can't help but be enthralled by it.
And he really has some emotional outbursts in the second movement as well.
Yeah, I think that's very operatic. Obviously, it's like an aria, and you have these moments of despair coming back. That remind me of some of the operas, like Don Giovanni, for instance. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, throughout, even the kind of contemplative, beautiful, melodious second movement has these moments of anguish and despair. Like the middle section, it's very much like the first movement in that sense.
And by the third movement, has Mozart resolved himself to all of these emotions he's experiencing, or is he still going through it full on?
I don't know. The third, I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what he was feeling, I guess, but I feel like the third is kind of it's a presto movement, although I think it's almost impossible to be playing it presto. So most people play it a little bit under the tempo marking. I think it just has this very hurried, intense quality to it. I don't know if it doesn't have to have the same pathos as like the first and second, but it has a freneticism to it, like almost like he's done. He needs to move on somehow, but I mean, these emotions are still there, and so it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
I think
very
trying to
frantic. It's
what
really frantic.
it is. It's frantic, and it's fun. I think it's a fun ending. It's a little intense to play, so definitely a little technical
Yes, a
movement there.
very challenging piece for sure.
Hmm.
Um, so you've also selected another sonata, which couldn't be more different, but also couldn't be more the same. You've selected to play the sonata by Alban Berg. Both are Austrian composers who had a lot of their career activity was centered in Vienna. Um, and you and I were speaking about this piece a few weeks back, and I was surprised to hear that he actually uses sonata form and that it's quite, like, he follows it quite closely. Even though this piece was written, I believe you told me 1909?
Yes, that's when it was published. It's a little uncertain as to exactly when he finished it, but I think
Right.
the first performance was either then or in 1910. So,
So tell us about this Berg Sonata, because when I looked at the score, I was, first of all, very impressed because it's extremely challenging work, and also hauntingly beautiful. So tell us how he, like, almost 120 years later, or 130 years, is taking this form that was um, perfected, quote unquote, perfected in classical period, and now he's using it at the turn of the century, heading into the second Viennese school. Tell us about that.
um, well, I think it's notable first of all that it's that he's writing a sonata at this point. I mean, he was studying with Schoenberg, who was one of the instrumental people in modernism and expressionism at that point. So, I mean, to go back, I mean, actually, that was an interesting thing that this cohort kind of did. Like, I mean, it's called the Second Viennese School, whereas Mozart was part of what they call the First Viennese School, with along with Beethoven and Haydn, a very loosely formed group that had its name come a lot later. Um, but I would say that with Berg, it's notable that it's one movement too. So a typical sonata is three or four, or even two, rarely one. Um, so I think that's something that's very notable. Secondly, it's technically in the key of B minor, but it sounds like it's kind of all over the place. So it's very chromatic, which means there's just a lot of basically a lot of semitones, a lot of things making you not understand exactly what tonal area it's in. So it's less accessible in some ways, I think, in that way. But I think because of the way that he's able to phrase things, the way that the sonata is constructed itself, and the repetition, this kind of idea of development of variation, that you're able to kind of ground yourself pretty quickly in it. And the fact that he repeats the exposition or the first part really, I think, helps to ground and center people. So you're like, okay, I'm hearing this again, even though it was a little difficult the first time, maybe I can kind of come to terms with it more the second time.
That helps both the artist and the audience.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
I
so
can't
the
imagine
repetition is nice.
memorizing that piece.
It's funny. For me, it wasn't that difficult. I think it looks, I think, pretty inaccessible when you look at the score and stuff like that. Maybe just listening to it without the score is a more accessible experience.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I see behind me a poster of New York City. Well, behind you,
Oh yeah. It's the subway map,
it's a subway map.
like from a long time ago. And it's pretty big, but it doesn't have like the whole island on it. But it's just like the lines, I think, back in the 50s, what they had.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So the next music we're going to talk about on your program is all about New York. A
Hmm.
composer based in Brooklyn, um, Nico Muhly, fantastic
Yes.
composer, and one of the pieces is from the Hudson Cycle. So, can you tell me what's it like walking along the Hudson River in different seasons in New York?
Um, well, spring, summer, and fall are all nice, I would say. Depending on what time you're talking. If it's early fall, it's probably the best time to walk along it, or right now, spring. Summer is, brutally hot, and winter, it's really frigid to feel the wind coming off of it. But I actually do live very close to it. So it's been a great experience to be so close to water, to be close to Riverside Park, where you can kind of take in some nature in this concrete jungle. So it's nice to be able to have that nearby. And this piece, Hudson Cycle, is based off of kind of the uneven undulations of the river, and also as a wedding gift to two of his friends, Nico's friends, that were leaving New York and moving. So it has this kind of longing quality. I think there's something very melancholy about it, and yet it also has this like pulsing rhythm, these 3 against 2 rhythms going on, with the right hand playing 3 while the left hand's playing 2, and actually the opposite. But either way, it gives it, so you feel like you're moving forward. It has this minimalist quality, kind of recalls Philip Glass or Steve Reich or Terry Riley or even John Adams, but it has a very much it's a very tonal scheme. It's very, very beautiful, I'd say.
Yeah, it is lovely, and I guess it has that underlying energy of the city.
Yeah, and then the river, I think, too. So I mean, the river and the city kind of being almost joined in a way.
Hmm.
Um,
And the other piece by Nico Muhly that you've included is quiet music.
mhm.
I've been to New York quite a few times, um, and I have to say that quiet is not one word that I would associate with that city, but there have been moments that I've experienced in the city that are quiet. Um, they have been at very wee hours,
Mhm.
but it's still, there are times when people are actually sleeping in that city. Um, is it? Are you able to find quiet as an artist in New York to be with your thoughts, to be with music, to think about repertoire? Is it possible in New York?
It's hard. It's definitely difficult. I was recently talking with my teacher, one of my teachers at Yale, my former teacher Melvin Chen, about he has an apartment actually really close to where I live, and he hasn't been for over a year because of COVID. But he was saying that he always felt it difficult to practice in the city, like he was bothering someone because you're so close, in close proximity to your neighbors and things like that. And it's difficult to find. I mean, as you can hear now, horns and things like that going on. It's difficult to find that solace. I would say that is a challenge. I guess you kind of have to figure out how you can get that quiet and that contemplative nature in your own mind. Sometimes it is difficult. Certain places are quieter than others. You can go to the park, you can go to Central Park, you can go to other places. I mean, even where when I practice, it can be difficult, it can be loud outside. So I think it's very much a challenge to find solace. And it's very different from anywhere else that I've lived when I was in school, for instance, in the practice rooms or where I'm from in California or anything like that. So yeah, that is a challenge. Quiet music, I know he's based in New York and all that, but this is the second actually of 3 etudes he was writing, so 3 studies. And the other 2 are much more fat. They're much quicker pieces. This one is more of a study in drones and spacing, lots of ninths, for instance. But he was actually writing these 3 pieces as kind of studies for himself as well, for like writing a bigger piano work, which he still has not actually written. And I'm not sure if he ever will, but I mean, they're there anyway. And they're great pieces in their own right. But I don't know if this had anything really for him to do with New York, nor do I know where he wrote it. It's kind of unclear. But I mean, it's hard to find. But yeah, they're very different pieces from something that is totally based, Hudson Cycle being totally New York based, and this to be something I think quite different. And who knows, maybe he wrote it. I feel like he couldn't have written this piece here. So maybe he wrote it at a retreat or, at a festival somewhere else.
He must have been in the mountains somewhere or a forest, because
Yeah, I think this would have been I mean, he does live in Brooklyn. It's a bit quieter, so perhaps. But something tells me he wrote that one somewhere else.
for sure. Well, we're really looking forward to the concert on Saturday, and we wish that this could have been in person, because you visited our concert series several occasions, and you have quite a loyal little audience here in Vancouver, actually.
Yeah, I've been there quite a bit thanks to your series and a few other things now too. So
It's
yeah,
been great. And I guess that one advantage of everybody's acquisition of technological prowess over this pandemic has been that we can really expand our field of artistic activities. We can get people to record in different cities, and it's it's great, actually, because it means that people can stay in touch with an audience they've built in a different city, and talk to colleagues around the country who have had people that would regularly visit their series every 2 years. If this was going to be the year, they sent a greeting video to their audience or their donors, or they did something like that. So
hmm
it was very cool to hear.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely been something forced upon us, but I think in some ways it's something that will be also a lasting legacy of this, in some ways, and maybe a supplemental sense, but also sometimes I think people are now more willing to maybe listen to concerts like this. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that, for example, if an artist like yourself comes from out of town, um, God willing, when the borders are opened,
yeah,
then I think at that point, people can live stream, so that your students in New York could tune in.
exactly. So it can be maybe backwards. Yeah, you're at the actual
Backwards,
series. Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
backwards.
And I mean,
Sure.
schools have done this for at least 12 to 15 years. I think streaming, at least audio streaming, video streaming when I went to Yale was like just becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like that was nice that my parents, if they couldn't fly out, or my friends could watch it. So yeah,
Absolutely, I remember.
yeah, and you watched.
I did. I watched your DMA final recital. It was fantastic.
Yeah, so that was great. So yeah, it's a way for us to kind of keep in touch despite being distant. So
Absolutely. And where do you teach in New York?
I teach at Weatherby Pembridge, New York School, New York. It's an interesting name. But yeah, so it's a private British school actually, and
Fantastic.
it's their New York I guess, yeah,
Campus.
yeah, other campus, their new campus here. So I teach, yeah, piano lessons there. So,
Wonderful.
mhm.
And wish all your students the best in their musical growth and year-end recitals for the academic year.
Yeah, yeah, they
That's
all recorded for the spring recital. They all sound good. So yeah,
that's right. I'll be recording my students in a few weeks as well, and I told
great.
them don't wear your sweatpants.
Yeah, they all looked really, really good. All my students were
Good.
dressed up. So
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
And
great.
we look forward to hearing you play all dressed up on Saturday.
Yeah, yeah,
It'll be fantastic. And again, we want to thank you for this beautiful performance that closes out our season. I can't imagine better repertoire or better musician to close out our regular season. So
yeah.
we're
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored. So thank you.
fantastic. And to our friends that are listening on audio, uh, you would be interested in listening to this concert, you can email us after to get a copy of the recital, or you can buy a ticket on Eventbrite or our website. And we would like to thank Tom Lee Music for this fantastic microphone that is hiding behind me. They are our tech sponsor for this podcast. I would like to thank my amazing podcast editor, Joshua Daniel Short, for always making me and my guests sound amazing and being patient. And thank you to Michael for being our guest today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Have a great evening, everybody, and we will see you on Saturday at 6 p.m. for the concert.